All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Eckstein Hall and Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people who are doing interesting and important work in this region and beyond. Today, we're talking beyond. John Pudner is our guest today. Mr. Pudner is a pretty interesting guy on a lot of levels. He is the executive director of an organization called Take Back Our Republic. We'll be talking about that organization, which I think, John, we could say safely believes that the current campaign finance system is flawed, that we need to do some things very differently in the way our politics work today. And so we're going to talk about that with John, who has an interesting track record, too. He has run political campaigns for more than 20 years. He's a conservative. He's a Republican. He is somebody who helped engineer the upset of Eric Cantor back in 2014. So we'll be talking about all that today with John Pudner. Won't you please give him a warm welcome to Marquette University Law School. And the one thing that I really should have mentioned is John is a Marquette University alumnus.
Yes.
What year, John?
87.
87.
No good basketball teams during my 4 years here.
He's also quite a basketball guy, and we actually are going to talk a little bit about that at the end because he's an analytics guy, so it's pretty interesting. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Marquette. I guess let's start at the very beginning and give people a sense of what your organization is. Take Back Our Republic. What is it?
We are a group that wants conservative solutions to campaign finance reform. We think that this campaign system is broken. We think that progressives on this issue often realize the problem before a lot of conservatives did, but this is a bad system for everyone. And we want to start with some solutions that conservatives can accept, but bring them into this debate because this system doesn't work for anyone.
It's about the individual. Is that the way your organization sees it? We have to emphasize individuals.
Yes. Some just say for shorthand, there's too much money in politics, and that's a nice sound bites. I like sound bites during my 20-some years of politics, but it's a bigger problem than that. If all money were ideological, I don't know that I'd have this as a priority issue. If some conservatives and liberals were just giving for their perspective philosophies, that's great. The problem is it's becoming so transactional. I mean, you have places that are, budgeting several $1 million, knowing that they may get several billion in government contracts, for example. And that all leads to deficits, et cetera. So back to the individuals, you said, the problem is that elected officials are not incentivized to talk to voters and people in their community. They're incentivized to talk to out-of-state donors, whether it be corporate, unions, special interests, pick your bad guy, billionaire, whatever. But they're talking to the wrong people and they're becoming the constituency.
And what is the result in terms of public apathy, public participation in the political process?
Yes, public participation is much lower. People don't feel like they have any impact. They see the kind of money that's flowing around. And this is one reason we'd like to bring back the old tax credit for small political contributions. Now, what I mean by that is, through 1986, if you gave $100, $200 to a candidate of your choice, you got to take that off your taxes. The reason any small dollar incentive like this is good is, again, it takes the elected officials and politicians' focus back to the voter, because now you not only have a vote, but you've got a little bit of money in your pocket, and someone can look at, well, gosh, are there 10,000, 20,000 voters who could actually contribute to me or contribute to my opponent if I'm really answering to someone in New York or some big donor? So that's why we want to get it back to the individual.
I want to have you address what you hear from some folks who are involved in the political process today, and they say that money is speech. Money is a part of the process. Why is it a bad idea to have more speech, to talk more about the issues, to give people a greater understanding of a certain point of view? What's your response to that?
Sure. Once money was, well, really, this goes back several court decisions for the lawyers in the room, and this is way before Citizens United. I mean, go back to Buckley. But yes, that speech was money. So I believe there's a certain degree, let's just for argument's sake say, okay, money is speech, and the ability to give money and contribute is speech. The problem is if you go beyond that to say, and therefore you can put no limit on money, that's a huge jump. I mean, every right, even if you just said, okay, go all the way and say money is speech, which is a right, even rights have boundaries when they bump into other people's rights. We all know this. So you have to have parameter. If your right is trouncing someone else's, then their right has been taken away. And I think this applies especially to money in politics. You know, if 57 billionaires in general are picking the presidential nominees that the rest of the people get to choose from, well, is that free speech? Those 57 people having unlimited free speech that completely takes every other voter out of the equation? I would argue contrarily that what you've done then is taken away the free speech of the average person. I mean, 57 people having an unlimited right, no one else having it, is hardly a right.
So your organization wants to see not only limits to big corporate donations or donations by labor unions, but you also don't want to see the Democrats like Tom Steyer or the Republicans like Sheldon Adelson controlling the political process.
Absolutely. And again, this was another one where, you know, progressives were used to talking about the Koch brothers, and when I go to a conservative audience saying, let's remember Tom Steyer, I mean, you know, both sides learned to play this game. And it's funny, I've talked to conservatives who had different reservations. After their initial shock that this was my focus, and what are you doing, John? Is this in my playbook on Republican domination? And I said, look, if your assumption after Citizens United was this is a huge advantage for Republican, I think you're wrong. I mean, President Obama certainly showed Democrats are capable of raising $1 billion if you're going to have these rules. I mean, Hillary Clinton did. So absolutely. And you know, Tom Steyer will say, well, my money's disclosed and the Koch brothers isn't. There's an argument there. However, Tom Steyer, for example, funded the whole war on coal, if you will, and no one knew it for over a year. Now, maybe you agree with everything he put money into and there are real environmental concerns, but he runs alternate energy companies. So you know, he made a lot of money on those donations. So I think you can, anytime there's that kind of money flowing around and it's transactional, that's the big question. You're getting something back from it. That's the biggest problem.
You touched on this, and I'd like to follow up on that disclosure. I saw an interview with you recently, and you said something, and I hope I'm quoting you accurately here. You said something to the effect that unless we start, we're going to have an oligarchy unless we start getting serious about disclosure. What do you mean?
Well, at least if we have disclosure, even if you had no campaign limits, and I'm not advocating that, but at least the voter could say, oh my gosh, someone's trying to buy the election, they can respond. The big change I saw in my 20 years is the money used to pretty much all flow through the candidates or the parties, either of which you can hold accountable. I mean, if you like the Affordable Care Act or you didn't like Obamacare, that's actually a position that most people hold. They like the Affordable Care Act and they hate Obamacare, just so you know.
That's actually, no, that is true. Our poll showed that. It depends on how you describe it as to how people feel about it.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah. Absolutely. But, you know, when the giving was from the parties, you know, you could hold the party accountable and vote against them, or if the commercials are coming from a candidate, the money's going through a candidate, the candidate's name's on it. But when it's all this, you know, I could start a PAC today, you know, Wisconsinites who love Wisconsin, and even though I don't really live in Wisconsin, you know, we could run commercials and go away in November. Well, you have no accountability then. And that's what I'd call hidden money. Even if it's disclosed on that PAC, it's not tied to the candidate.
So you said you've seen changes, and I guess I'll spend a little time on your personal reasons for doing this. You think politics has changed from the business that you got into?
Oh, dramatically. I still remember the process for picking a candidate as a teenager, my first big door-to-door effort, and you evaluated candidates. It was just a state senator who passed away, and okay, who in the community has done real community service? Who can articulate positions? Who has some real expertise and knows how to fix things? And that was our evaluation process for candidates. So it starts right in the beginning for who's getting encouraged to run. And at the time, you kind of had this rule that a third of your time is going to be spent with constituents, coming out, meeting, going to town hall, knocking on doors. You know, a third of your time is applying your expertise to solve things. You know, maybe if you're an accountant, a good one, you know, you're helping on budget items, or you're out of education, you know something about how schools really work, whatever. And then a third was fundraising. And someone would say, well, that may be too much. But anyway, it was balanced. You did want to be able to raise some money, but you could win with big grassroots. Well, now the candidate evaluation process is very simple. Do they have a lot of money? Are they willing to be a telemarketer 10 hours a day, calling and asking for money? That's where you start. So right from the beginning in candidate selection, this political industrial complex that's built up starts. Consultants are making money on this, and it goes all the way through. And of course, that translates because we pick the wrong candidates sometimes, or they learn they have to adapt. They really got in this for service, but they learned, well, I'm sorry, you did not, call time is the only thing a candidate's judged on now. How many calls do they make that day? And they mean asking for money. They don't mean asking constituents how they feel about things. And just to watch that morph over the years, and even coming from a conservative perspective, in 2000, my job was to organize the faith-based vote for George Bush in 16 battleground states. And whichever side of the issue you were on, I mean, there were progressives doing great grassroots stuff too, but people had real power to change votes. I mean, it was a matter of, can you turn people out? Can you get literature out? Can you win them over? It was very much a grassroots focus. Well, now it's just all TV. I mean, it's, we call it AstroTurf, and it's so overwhelmed. And again, pick your, progressive groups doing the same thing. Again, that was where my background. But you felt like when you lost, they had a better grassroots effort. People were more into their candidate. We lost fair and square. Now you have the dark money TV commercial comes in that buries you. You're like, gosh, that was so distorted. That was so unfair. And just the wrong candidate started to win.
I want to talk about how you compete in an environment like the one you just described, if you don't have a lot of money and if you don't have the big TV ads. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But I do want to just follow up a little bit more on the reaction you've had to what you're doing today. I mean, you have strong roots in the party. You're a proud conservative. How are you viewed within the Republican Party of today, the establishment party?
Sure. Well, I would say there definitely were some that, again, were in a little shock, like, why is this your issue? But to some degree, even within Republican primaries, I was often kind of the grassroots candidate against the money, so it wasn't a complete shock. I mean, if a TV consultant who's got his 40-foot yacht out on the water from all the money he's made on campaigns were to do this, that would probably be more of a shock. I mean, I was always the one year I organized 172,000 door knocks. I mean, that was my thing. It was always grassroots, and it takes some money for infrastructure for that. But yes, certainly, when I go to Republican meetings, there's some pushback. I mean, we'd love everyone to join this, but just know you'll lose all your friends if you ever join Take Back Our Republic. I still remember right out of the gates, I was very critical when Wisconsin changed the law to basically make the Ethics Commission the same as the FEC in Washington, which can never, ever enforce a law. So, I was very critical of that. Had a bunch of progressive friends, including a number from Wisconsin, call, and John, you've finally seen the light. It's so good you came through all these years. And then a few months later, we were talking about C4s that break the IRS regulation, really spend all their money in politics. And I pointed out that Planned Parenthood was the biggest offender in an open secret study. I mean, the left-of-center study. And all those new friends just called me, you're terrible. We knew this was just a front group. And suddenly the Republicans who disowned me 4 months ago were, oh, good, John. It was just the same thing. I mean, just call a spade a spade. Just play by the rules that are there. So it's there's been some negative, but as you said, it's such conservative campaign background that some get hit, well, you're just a front group, and this is a front effort for someone. I think I've had deep enough roots that even when I get those hits, we're okay.
There are some other fairly prominent people who are on the board of directors, for example, take back Mark McKinnon, who helped elect George W. Bush a couple of times. He's a media guy. He's had a lot of success. Professor Richard Painter at the University of Minnesota worked on ethics for President Bush. So it's not just you. There are other prominent Republicans involved in this effort.
Absolutely, yeah. We have Lynell Marold out of Texas, who was the first woman to run a title insurance company in Texas, 700 offices, deep Republican roots. All the Republican presidential candidates visit her on their first flight through Texas. So we do have that too. So now the board certainly has some Republicans who were prominent, never Trumpers. It's a nice mix of the board, but they all have some kind of Republican or conservative inroads, I'd say, to make the case to different groups.
And we'll talk more about this too, but you were not a never Trumper. You were supportive of
Donald Trump. I was supportive. New York Times today is quoting me, and they just called, and they're thrilled because they wanted to quote me and say that I'm telling Ivanka she has to divest, as I said about the president, but I also wrote an article in Breitbart on how Trump, would win, should win, et cetera, several months. They like that. It's a credibility thing.
So let's talk about some of what your organization is doing around the country. And I want to focus on the state of South Dakota for a moment. So a year ago, you're involved in this big effort, you and a number of folks, what's been called an anti-corruption legislation. So it's, I think the name of it is Initiated Measure 22 in South Dakota. So they're going to create an ethics commission in South Dakota. They're going to do sort of a public finance component to this. They're going to make sure people can't go into lobbying the moment they leave the state legislature in South Dakota. The people of South Dakota vote for this. It's narrow, but a little over 51% voted for this. Obviously, you would see that as a victory, but the victory didn't last long. It is an interesting commentary on where we are today in politics. What happened after you won?
Yes, public referenda and an emergency vote is called by the legislature to undo what the people just voted on. Now, I usually think of emergency action meaning like, a hurricane just hit us, but the emergency was that South Dakota's law was being changed, and let me tell you what South Dakota's law was. Not only unlimited and undisclosed political contributions, but unlimited and undisclosed gifts. You could literally give a legislature a car, a gold watch, jewelry, all legal, and not even tell anyone. So it was the worst law in the country. There's some other pretty bad ones, but this was the worst. And so we went in to get rid of that, put some caps on, and we don't always even advocate caps. I think states have the right to put them in if they want, et cetera, but it's not our top priority. But to cap the spending, but also just disclose. And so, this was a state that went, I think, 63% Trump, if I recall. I mean, clearly this was a conservative state. So I flew into my state for the first day, and the thought was this would probably lose. The public wouldn't accept campaign finance, comprehensive reform. I landed, I talked to the USA Today affiliate there, and within an hour there was a headline that said, Trump backers should support IM-22. Which was not anything anyone had been thinking would ever be in a headline. But I just made the case that, look, even though the term drain the swamp wasn't used, this is what this campaign is based on. I mean, the things that motivate a lot of people on Trump, and this was from an MSNBC report, when they really went out and waited in crowd was, we just want the deals to stop getting cut. We want the deals to stop getting cut. Well, what this did is kind of force the Republican Party. They'd been kind of behind the scenes trying to kill it. Well, they immediately responded attacking me, the state party. But we steadily made that case that, no, as a conservative, you should not be for corruption. This leads to corruption. Well, I was hit the next day on talk radio. They called and said, well, the Republican Party says you're an outsider. I said, true, I'm an outsider. I said, but unlike the people on the other side of this, I will not be asking South Dakotans for $1 of tax money whether or not this passes. I don't lobby here. I don't try to get contracts here. I said, the Koch brothers run 9 asphalt operations in adjoining states to South Dakota. South Dakota spends $300 million on roads every year. They are a bidder on roads, and they are trying to stop the disclosure of unlimited gifts to legislators. I said, there's a reason the average South Dakotan pays about $1,400 extra a year in what's referred to as a corruption tax, beyond what an average level of corruption would do. This isn't even saying clean. This is just give us average corruption, and we all save $1,400. So I said, you're right. I can't hire someone in the state to be my spokesperson. I don't have that kind of money, but here's the case. And so it won them over, and we had this, and to have the legislature come back. So we're going back with a constitutional amendment, which the legislature cannot undo, to fight this battle again. But even when the people speak that clearly, and it was a close vote, but a clear win, politicians don't like to regulate themselves.
And the vote in the legislature to repeal this legislation was not close.
No, there was never much hope. It was a very quick vote.
So are you optimistic about having a constitutional amendment succeed there and being able to actually do this and keep it in place?
I think so. I mean, anytime you win 51-49, you're not sure, but I think we do have the added impetus of they threw out the will of the people. I mean, that is a great motivator in this vote. So we're hoping we have another win in November that sticks.
You're active in other states, Missouri, California. Yes. What about Wisconsin?
We really want this Wisconsin chapter to be a big one. I feel like Wisconsinites have been subjected to a lot of harsh advertising on both sides. I mean, going through the recalls, presidential becoming a battleground. It's funny, when you talk to people in non-battleground states, They don't know what you mean by people being sick of negative TV, believe it or not. Because if you're in Connecticut or Alabama...
You live in Alabama.
I live in Alabama. They've never seen a commercial or presidential. I mean, maybe if they're watching CNN or Fox, they see a national one. They don't get this back to back. They have no concept of how bad this political industrial complex is and how anyone can set up a PAC and start pummeling in TVs. You don't even need the candidate's permission. There's scam PACs where all the money's really going to consultant. I mean, the system's that bad. So we think, and I have to admit, I got a kick when there were recalls on Scott Walker. I did go to undergrad with here. I'd make a point.
You went to school with him.
Went to school, undergrad here. I did enjoy asking people collecting recall petitions, where are you from? And, it was always another state. So, it was no big deal. I mean, there were people on Walker's side, too. But just the idea that non-Wisconsinites are flooding the state, out-of-state money's flooding the state. I mean, whoever you support, you're picking, and I would say last Lieutenant Governor's Democrat is a friend, too, so she's great. But, whoever you support, I mean, shouldn't you have some sovereignty in your state? I mean, I'm not saying you cut out all outside money, but when it's all outside, undisclosed, people outside the state who want things that are good for them or for some corporate headquarters or union somewhere else, but not for Wisconsinites. So we think Wisconsin, I don't want to say a ground zero, there are a few top priority states, but this is one we really want to build.
So hypothetically, what kind of things would you like to see in a state like Wisconsin?
Well, I would like to look back at this Ethics Commission issue. I'd certainly like to look at the revolving door. There was some talk of that right away on how quickly you could do the revolving door. Would there at least be, I think, a brief period was talked about.
Before you can become a lobbyist.
Right, before you can become a lobbyist. The more you broadcast to people, come in for a year or two, serve, and get back out and make money going back and lobbying, that's a problem. And that's one reason we're in Missouri. I mean, you have people in the legislature, they literally vote to pass something that's real good for a company, and then quit 2 weeks later, quit the legislature to go work for the company. I mean, it's just corruption's legal. So, and I'm not saying I have examples like this in Wisconsin, and certainly as a Republican in Green Bay in the Senate who was the one who was voting, I'd say, consistent with campaign finance reform. So, there's a balance. I do believe there's times the retribution that you have, that's the counterbalance on disclosure. What about when there's I think that's a legitimate issue, but there are ways to deal with that short of throwing out any enforcement that can ever be done for any kind of campaign violation. I hate to ever agree with Elizabeth Warren, but she's had one thing absolutely right, I think, which is the system should always make it easy to participate and hard to cheat. I mean, you've got people that some places get nailed for filing errors. That's a way to scare challengers out of running. There's going to be a technical way, and your treasurer is going to be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble. You didn't fill out a form and you campaign. That's bogus. I mean, give someone a warning. But, we make it hard to get in the game, and then you can shovel even foreign money in through these secret sources, through unverified credit card. I mean, too many to go into in this hour, but you make it easy to shovel lots of even foreign money in and hard for the average person to say, I want to run for office and serve my community.
I want to talk to you about something that you've become known for, and that is being able to run successful, low-budget campaigns. And I guess the most prominent one is the campaign that you helped engineer for Dave Brat, the current congressman in the state of Virginia, who defeated the then House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor. People just did not see that coming at all. Describe for us what you did in that campaign that ultimately proved so effective.
Sure, and when we say didn't see it, the last poll on the race 3 weeks out, we'd closed it to 32 points. So now if Marquette...
Dave Brat trailing by 32 points.
3 weeks out. Now if Marquette had been running the poll, they would have had exactly right, because this is the best polling outfit in the country. I mean, really.
Thank you.
It really is. So we did a couple things. First of all, I spent a year looking for a candidate. I tell every candidate, you want to be part of a mission. If it's self-fulfillment that you're going to run for office, you're in the wrong business. This should be part of whatever your cause is, better community, whatever. So spent a year looking for a candidate and couldn't find the right one. We wanted to beat Cantor. We felt like he'd gotten out of touch. He personified the problem with big money. I mean, he went into Congress and he was worth $1 million, $1.5 million. 10 years later, running a campaign, he's worth $13 million. Well, if you save your $200,000 salary every year for 10 years and don't spend anything and don't pay any taxes, you still don't get to $13 million. Well, what happened? Well, his wife worked for Goldman Sachs. you really can't hit members of Congress for insider information that you pick up as a member. I mean, and again, this is all legal. I guess the sad part is I'm not suggesting anything illegal was ever done, but by sitting in Congress, he went from $1 million, maybe $2 to $13 million. And he also just left the district. He was the embodiment. The constituents were somewhere else. The constituents were a big check writer in New York or somewhere else. He just wasn't focused on the constituents. And this is where I say oligarchy. I mean, you got to have representative government. So to how we won, spent about a year, went to a bunch of candidates. None of them would have had a chance. Finally found this one, went to him, and Dave Brat, economics professor, he and his wife and 2 children, photogenic to get into the shallow part that just happens. Appropriately aged boy, girl, one in high school. If your kids are too young, everyone hits you for why aren't you at home with the kids? I mean, there are all these little things. So there was a lot of luck. Let me just say, there was luck too. Got the perfect candidate, sat down with him, and I said, look, I've got 17,000 activists in this district. I've run conventions here. I said, with our IP targeting on computers, we can hit these 23,000 conservatives who haven't been voting it anymore because they've given up. But we also have these 17,000 people who kind of go back and forth between Democrat and Republican primaries. It's an open primary state. There's no Democrat primary going on. So we have the math. We can do this. And I finally convinced him and his wife to do it. And to watch the money. We went through, I said, how much do you think you can raise? You asked me, I'll raise $350,000. Plenty of friends, et cetera. This guy did do his call time. He dialed thousands of people. He raised $18,000. And it was just, hey, I can't do that to the majority leader. Hey, I'm just worried this little project I got might not go well. And, just everyone's scared to give against the big money. So we were down into March, $5 million to $18,000, which is hard to budget. So we actually we did finally get 200 people in a room to ask them all for money, and had the worst fundraiser in the history of American politics. If you ever get a candidate, a professor as a candidate, no offense to anyone here, and tell them, look, it's a 10-minute speech. The guy asking for money gets up and asks for the money. I stand at the door with a basket and balloon and don't let them leave until they give money. This is a real simple equation. Professor, 50-minute speech. No one's sitting. Everyone's standing on an asphalt floor. Average age at Republican events is a little older. I think a few were sore. I mean, there were definitely some old George Bush watch, And then we had a kicker. We had the guy coming in asking for money. And this was the guy who actually did the Gods and Generals movie, which Confederate generals and all. And I asked him, he's a good guy, but I said, listen, Confederate, war, et cetera. I asked him, I said, listen, I don't think you're the right one to ask this group for money. This is going to be like 200 fired up people. He got very defensive, said, look, I got Ted Turner to give me $80 million to do a movie on Confederate generals. I can do this. And I told him and the candidate, I said, that is probably the least relevant experience you could possibly have. You're walking into 200 rabid conservatives. Every one of them hates Ted Turner, just as an aside, but this is not the crowd you're thinking. But that's okay. Just get up. They do like that you did this movie. You'll have some DVDs, and just ask them for money. So he gets up. The only thing he left out during his 50-minute speech with people still standing was he never asked anyone for money. Other than that, he covered everything, how globalist and immigration and his worldview, and got up and left the stage, which, so the third speaker was me. My speech was very concise. There's no cavalry coming. I'll be standing at the door. Give me your money. So I ran to the door. And we collect 23,000, so kind of a long way to get to. The campaign eventually got 200,000 people gave at the end, but we had 200 people knocking on doors every day. I mean, I started with 17,000 people in my database in that district that had been to convention, been to a rally, done something real, made phone calls, just this enormous grassroots. But if you're going to win a underdog, underfunded campaign, you need two things. You need that traditional campaign, however you do it, people interacting, retail. I mean, some counties where you can't door-to-door, it's the county dump. Everyone drops their trash off Saturday. I mean, find that spot where you've got them captive and they're stuck in line. Yeah, and you've got to do that retail. You also have to do the sophisticated IP address. You've got to get the right commercial into the right people. Not to contradict each other, but there's certain messages that are going to fire up certain people. The people who went back and forth between Democrat and Republican primaries, did not need the message we had on cutting deals with Obama that the 23,000 were getting, that were really kind of the rabid conservatives who were, that sounded too derogatory, the principled conservatives who were fired up to get out there. So you have to be able to target, and you look at it, and this was really something political scientists to look at Trump. I mean, they have the best data targeting ever. And Trump beautifully did this. I don't believe in data. It's all bogus. I mean, that was all for show. Brad Parscale's a genius. I met the guy at Trump Tower a few months out and said, listen, actually told Bannon, and I said, this guy knows everything. But just to give you a sense for the IP stuff you can do on the side, funniest stat, you can match voter preferences and what their interests are based on just other stuff that seems to have nothing to do with the issue at hand. For example, the number one indicator that someone would come over and vote for Donald Trump based on a tough illegal immigration ad was they watched The Walking Dead. Don't ask me why. In a campaign, you don't have to figure out why. But after, and let me be clear, I was not involved in the campaign in any way, but after the fact, hey, how do you do this? How are you targeting? And in a 3-month campaign, you don't even ask why. You just say, oh, these people do this. I mean, early on, it was Volvo drivers tend to vote Democrat, pickup, you know, those were easy. So you've got to embrace both the high-tech stuff, but you can't all be, no offense to the younger people, you know, you can't all be the tech nerd that never talks to anyone. I mean, your campaign has to, you know, different people respond different ways. But my whole point is there's so, you know, so we had all these targeted, the door knocks are right, the commercials right. People think you were on CNN or Fox News if you go to their computer. And the scary part is, no, I went to your computer because we had your IP address, and the first time you opened a video, the commercial played that we wanted you to see. And that stuff's not expensive. That cost 2 cents for you to see that. And then you went and saw Dave Brat at an event and said, wow, your campaign's really taken off. Wow, when did the money start coming in? And Brad would go, you know, we're up to $40,000 or whatever. but people don't remember if they saw that commercial on their computer or actually on a traditional TV screen. They just, oh, wow, he's advertising on Fox News. No, he's advertising to you and 23,000 other people at 2 cents a commercial. So they were running commercials, $5 million of broadcast TV. Why? Because in the political industrial complex, the consultant gets 15% from the TV station that the candidate never sees. I had someone tell me how much they loved a very prominent consultant, who I won't mention by name, and said he's been so great. He's done a few campaigns for me, and he's never even charged me. He just really likes me. I said, how much TV have you run? About $12 million. I'm like, okay, so he got $2 million. You know, but the candidate doesn't see anything. So the point is, these consultants, they want to make money. In most cases, it's a business. And so you really can beat them with low dollar, but the minute you only do one of those two, the minute you only do the traditional grassroots, you don't buy all these young whippersnappers with their smartphones, or you go the other way, and it's all high tech now, none of that old stuff matters, you can't win. And we're actually going to put out an open source playbook, which we can't release to anyone individually. We're a nonprofit until we put it out there for everyone. We will send it to the whole world, but it's going to be just a playbook. You know, you don't need to hire the big consultant. Here's how you run a winning campaign, low budget.
So it can be done in your mind.
It can. We erased that lead. We were just better targeted. We were turning them out, and you can do it.
I spent a couple of minutes about President Trump, and you referenced this earlier, but you're big on transparency. You have not been big on the way the president has handled his business dealings. You don't think there's enough separation between where he is today and his business interests. Why do you feel that way?
Well, yeah, we did. I would say the two that really jumped into this early were me and Peter Schweitzer, who wrote Clinton Cash, and were really critical of the lack of divestiture. You know, we thought Tillerson was a perfect example. Now, I'm not crying for Rex Tillerson, but he did give up tens of millions of dollars to go into public service. He still had $100 million left, so, you know, I'm not crying for him, but he did, you know, public service, but he divested. Divestiture has been our toughest issue with this administration because that we've been critical on a lot of media because, you know, if there's any doubt as to why a decision is made out of the White House, you know, that erodes confidence. Even if it didn't factor in, but just a full divestiture with a blind trust. I mean, again, Tillerson did it, others have done it, and I know they have a big empire, the Trumps, and there are lots of reasons it's harder for them than others, but if you're going to go in the White House, you've got to divest from the businesses. And this was the focus was really more on Ivanka more recently. It was originally on the president. But, originally she was going to be outside the White House. And I kind of gave him a pass. I said, hey, look, if she's not in the decision-making part, if she's off doing campaigns or something, I don't care if she divests. But once she took that White House position, that's just a tough one. And on the positive side, I think the revolving door stuff was great. I think some of the things they've put out are great. But I think that divestiture is always going to be the one that's the biggest question.
You know Steve Bannon. You went to the same Richmond Catholic school as Steve Bannon. A little difference in age, but describe for us how you came to know him and what your relationship is with him.
Sure. Yeah, Bannon, believe it or not, was a firebrand growing up. He's my fun experience a couple weeks ago was taking my little 14-year-old ballerina daughter through New York. She had just some training, and she said, Daddy, they have all these signs, impeach President Bannon. He has the same name as that guy you know. And I said, it's actually that guy. Yeah, Bannon's a go-getter. When he took over the campaign, we did text a little because having been through Bush 2000, and I knew the campaign had a much better chance after he won. I mean, I actually, beginning of September, sent 20,000 emails out to just saying my prediction was Clinton wins by 3 points popular vote and loses the electoral. I mean, it was just lined up. He is driven and organizes and creates a lot of energy. So that's always the asset you get with Steve Bannon. We had our relationship was actually they were trying to move our high school. When someone first connected us, it was kind of a central city high school that we felt Catholic Benedictines. The Benedictines had me for 12 years, so even 4 years of Jesuits, I still came out pretty conservative. So I think there was something in the mix there. But no, I love the Jesuits too. So they were trying to move and just put the school out in this rich, all-white suburbs of Richmond. And we decided to get together and fight the thing. We set up door to door. We actually beat everyone out of office that was trying to do this. It was great. I mean, we just saw together. But just to give you a sense, my first meeting with Bannon, we're sitting in a restaurant in Richmond. We'd only talked by phone, and this is only within the last decade. And we're sitting there, and he says, what's the plan? So I start laying it out. The three of us at lunch. We order. He says, quick phone call, takes it, and order. We wait a little. I've got my careful plan. Waited, and come back. And so he calls me 5 hours later. Haven't seen him yet. Lunch got cold and everything. So and he says, okay, and he picks up on the third point of what I had down. And I'm kind of like expecting, sorry I had to cut out or something. It never came. And picked it up, and we planned this thing out and beat all these people out of office and didn't like what they were doing. So he, after that, hired me to start just Breitbart Sports, just some of the sports background. He wanted to have a page to Breitbart. So, and boy, that's been interesting. I had a Fox Sports guy talk about how accurate my player rankings are, and he tweeted that out. And his first couple of responses, one of them was, hey, that dude writes for Breitbart. Why is he writing about basketball? So it gets a little, the readership somewhat different between college basketball and Breitbart readers normally. But yeah, so saw the driven guy. I mean, he's hard hitting, gets stuff done. Yeah, my quote in Time magazine when they did the piece on him was, he once called me, chewed me out, cursed me out for how bad the sports pages were, and 5 hours later I got a call from someone trying to hire me, this is before Take Back, obviously. And I said, that's great. I said, by the way, how'd you hear about me? And they said, I was just on with Steve Bannon. He said, you're the greatest ever. I mean, the guy literally cursed me out, told me I was incompetent 4 hours earlier. And so, he has that kind of intensity that rubs some people wrong, let's say.
I was going to say, as somebody who knows him a bit, he does have this public image right now. When you see the way he's discussed publicly, does that square with the guy that you know?
Yeah, I never bought the racist, the anti-Semitic charges. I mean, just knowing Jewish employees with them, I just never saw that. And even when Anti-Defamation League hit him right away, I kind of had to admit a few days later they really didn't have any racist comments he ever made. So that stuff I didn't buy on Bannon. And I think Alan Dershowitz said, as a matter of fact, it looked like a lot of those were based on comments on the Breitbart site. Well, any blog out there that's judged on the comments of people that come in, I mean, you have to police them. I mean, you do all kinds of searches and try to keep racist stuff off there. So I never bought that. Very hard hitting. I mean, he is much more anti immigration than I am. I mean, he views that, I think, as a bigger part of the problem. I do buy in. A lot of this is just automation and things like that. So he's very, very hard-hitting. But yeah, I never bought those hits, and I never really had them backed up. But certainly that he's a hard hitter. I mean, that's accurate.
And one quick final point on the Trump administration. The message when he took office was we're going to drain the swamp. To you, as someone who's been involved in grassroots politics, does it look like they're draining the swamp?
Well, I think they're taking some steps. There's certainly some disappointments and some positive. I like the basic ethics plans that you laid out, starting with revolving door. I mean, I think that was good. You laid out the 5 points in the campaign, laid out 5 points again. So yeah, I think there's some inroads there. Yeah, the divestiture, like I said, is the biggest negative for me because I think that's kind of the lead by example. And I do think they've got to focus. My concern is more where's it on the focus line. You get hit with the healthcare debate, and obviously you're off on something else for a while. But I think this was a central core. I mentioned the great MSNBC piece that Benji Singer did, still on the blog. But he waited out these Trump rallies, made allusion to this earlier, and he said, I thought I'd hear about immigration, I thought I'd hear about building the wall, he kind of went through all the things. He said, all anyone talked about was finally someone who's going to stop the deal cutting in D.C., finally someone who's going to, and they weren't using drain the swamp yet, but I think I want them to be successful in draining the swamp. I want that to be a focus. I don't think this is one of 15 issues that sort of helped Trump win. I think this was the underlying issue that even a lot of people said, really don't like this guy, but I don't want the insiders to win. That was one of the most telling post-exit polls. There were a lot of people who didn't like Trump, said, but at least this would be a win against the insiders making money, even if they didn't like Trump himself. So I think it needs to be more central and more of a priority. But I do think at least the ethics package that was laid out, if they can fight for that, is a good start.
So we'll wrap up here and we'll take a few questions from the audience. But I did want to ask you about basketball. You referenced the fact that you ended up sort of starting a sports page for Breitbart. But you are an analytics guy in basketball. You follow the sport very closely, big Marquette basketball fan, even in Auburn, Alabama. You remain a big Marquette basketball fan. How did you get started on that? How did that? It is a business for you, isn't it? The analytics part of it, or?
Oh no! Anyone who goes in this to make money, no. I had even.
So it's a hobby.
It really is a hobby. My wife would always accuse me of working 14 hours straight during campaigns, and I'd tell her no. The first 12 hours, I was crunching spreadsheets on precincts. The last 2, I've been doing my basketball stuff. That's my break. So she never saw the difference. But yeah, not to. Even wrote this Marquette book rating every player in the history of time a few years back. I mean, technically, I guess a few dollars came in on that, but trust me, those are giveaways. But no, we invented the system, value-add basketball, just being very analytical, figuring out how many points each player is worth to a team. And Sports Illustrated wrote a big piece, and suddenly all these NBA teams called.
So they ask you about a guy like Jimmy Butler, former Marquette alum, very successful NBA player, drafted late in, was it the first round or early second round? Or
30th. Yeah, but who's counting?
But you saw it. You knew he was going to be successful.
Sports Illustrated, they did the piece on me, and then Chicago Bulls, an assistant GM called, and he said, I hope you don't mind, the Sports Illustrated writer gave me your number. I'm like, basketball nut, getting a call from the NBA office. He says, is there any way we can meet? And I said, yeah. I said, you can meet. He said, are you up Midwest? I said, yeah, I'm coming to actually Marquette, Norfolk State or something. And he said, and I said, as a matter of fact, Norfolk State has a guy who can be a backup player. No one knows who he is. So I said, he said, yeah. He said, but listen, how is Jimmy Butler so much better than Lazar Hayward in your rankings? This was Butler's junior year. And I went through the whole math, and I said, and as a matter of fact, my NBA indicators is that Butler will be a starter within a few years, and Hayward probably is not an NBA player. And it was kind of nice because he thought I would be touting the home team, but it was kind of a balance. I thought Hayward. And so he met, and get to NBA, everything's political. He said, John, I have one big request. Our scouts followed up after seeing your numbers. We're really watching Butler now. You're right. Your numbers, and you're right on these 3 other guys around the country. He said, can you promise me not to write about Jimmy Butler for the next 2 months? And I said, I won't. I said, can I ask why? He said, we've got the 30th pick. Right now, no one thinks Butler's going to be drafted. They're going to start to spot him. He's going to start to move up. I need 29 teams to take a pass on Jimmy Butler. So the one thing I've done for any of you Chicago Bulls fans, opposed to Bucks fans and the Greek freak and all, I did help the Bulls, I'd say substantially, accidentally almost.
Are there parallels between the stuff that you do in basketball and the stuff you do for politics?
Oh, absolutely. Take the emotion out. I mean, I did the September 9th email blast I did on why Trump would win. It was analytical. I mean, if you'll take the emotion out, because, see, everyone either hated or loved Trump. So no one could give an even analysis because you wanted to see, and this was one problem Hillary had. MSNBC, I took a snapshot of one of their maps where it's, well, here's how Hillary gets to 430 electoral votes. Well, that's how your candidate spends TV money in Nebraska that should have spent here and spends time in Arizona. You've got to be just unbiased. Go, here's what the number said, and I just went through. And the only state I missed now, Pennsylvania, I didn't think it would quite flip. But I just said, here it is. Trump will be over 290 votes, but he's going to lose by 3 points. He's going to lose so badly in California. And so you've got to take the emotion out. And that was the hard part. Marquette with Butler being so high was just like, a lot of the NBA analytics ran it, and they said, look, we all think it's funny that a Marquette guy's that high, but actually your numbers are right. We've looked at all of them. So you just got to take the emotion out for that. Apply a little common sense.
In both politics and the sports, got to take the emotion out. Let's take a few questions from the audience. If you're seated in the bowl, you know the drill here. Press down on the rim, not on the ball, on the rim, and we'll listen to your question. If you're in the back, wait for Ryan, who has a microphone, and he will get to you. Okay, so... Yes, sir. We'll begin right here. Yes, your question, please. Press down on the rim. Yeah. There. Keep your finger down on the rim. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. You mentioned that your organization was in South Dakota, and you did some things there. Then you also briefly mentioned Wisconsin. And how do you go about your work? Are you working directly with legislators, or is that what you're doing? Anytime I've talked to a legislator in this state about any kind of reform, campaign finance, redistricting, and reform was in one ear and out the other, even though the public overwhelmingly supports these initiatives. So how are you going to convince them that they should do the right thing?
Sure, great question. Let me give the legal answer first. As a 501c3, we can only spend 15% of our time lobbying, and we do abide by that. So we can do some even less grassroots. Sorry to start with the legal, but I'm in a law school. I don't want to get in trouble with the IRS. I mean, we do stick to that. But within that scope, I was always a grassroots lobbyist. I would always go out to the people first. When we put we're going to put federal legislation in, I didn't even go to the Hill for the first 6 months. We built all these state chapters, and we made sure that some people were calling their members of Congress to say, I've joined this group, Take Back Our Republic. Well, then when we got there, we were actually getting meetings with Republicans, even though campaign finance certainly had a stigma to it. So we got a bunch of meetings because they were curious. They'd gotten calls from back home. So what I'd say is, it has to be more than just you. Anytime you can get any friends or any kind of network to call the legislators first, and particularly if they have some reason to say they'd like you to stop by, then it's like, oh, there are people back in my district. It's all about, is this a threat to my election? It's always a factor. And if you're just walking around by yourself, they don't see that. So anyway, we had all these people take meetings, and we actually got through a bit of disclosure, just verifying credit card contributions. We put a bill in. We actually got 53 Republican co-sponsors on that bill last year, and almost had a chance to get it through. And I was told you will get one Republican. Walter Jones in North Carolina is the only one who will back any campaign finance. So we got that, and now Ken Buck in Colorado, another Republican, has just written a book, Drain the Swamp, on what that really should mean. So you're starting to see some cracks there. And the other thing you can let them know, we can give polling data, campaign finance reform used to be about the 17th or 19th most important issue to voters. It's now 3rd or 4th in many polls among Republicans as well as independents and Democrats. So it's now what you call a voting issue. No one cares if you have an issue that's popular, but no one cares about it because they won't vote on it. But it's a voting issue now, and I think that's what you saw with Trump and Bernie campaigns both. Just this across the board, we're sick of the system, fix it. I don't know what the solution is. So I think you're going to have better meetings in the future, but anything you can do back home in their district, just through friends is helpful.
Ryan, right here.
Do you have any take on the effect of money in the Georgia election today?
Oh, no, and I haven't looked at where the money's flown into in that one. For those of you who don't know, because of Price being nominated by President Trump, there's an election, and it's unusual for Georgians because the one Democrat's actually in the race with a bunch of Republicans, so it's top two. It's an open primary just because of the strangeness of a special election. No, I haven't looked at where all the money's going. I know that kind of Newt Gingrich and his allies are behind one candidate, and there seem to be different freedom works and all, but that's the whole problem. When you first get a candidate, particularly for one of these, first thing you do is tour D.C. to see which groups who send in money that's not part of the campaign will back you, in essence. And there are coordination laws that are pretty strict, but up to a point, they kind of vet you, and then once they decide they're going to help you, they have to break off communication. But you know who got you there. So I can tell you just in general, a special so much floods in from third parties, and it's because they think we'll have our person there on our issues if they win. But I have not looked at the actual breakdowns.
Other questions? Yes, sir?
If we are to take back our republic and have government of the people, by the people, who is the greater threat to taking back our republic? The campaign funders or the lobbyists, and why?
Very good question. I would say the lobbyists are bigger. They're both important. But the problem is, lobbyists, it's almost all transactional. I do want to make that distinction. There are people who have a lot of money and are progressive or conservative and just want a more progressive or conservative government. I'm not that concerned about them. But the trading of money for whether it's government contract, tax break, program for an agency. I mean, you can, again, pick your bad guy. But the lobbyists, to the degree that they're facilitating this legal exchange of campaign contributions for your tax dollar, that's the problem. And so I think the lobbyist is the biggest thing. That's why we do think the revolving door is so crucial. At least don't let someone come in and just, knowing I just want to get out of this office in a year or two and make money lobbying back on it. But lobbying in general, South Carolina has been a very Republican state. Lobbyists are banned from giving any contributions. The systems work great. And a lot of these lobbyists don't like it. Because remember, if you're getting outbid, there's always a bigger fish, as they say. You may realize, I got a perfect plan. This would solve this real community issue, and I'm getting overwhelmed by someone who just has a bunch of political money, and they're putting, I mean, we had a case in Alabama, actually, the last senator I beat down there had a great sounding program go through that was lobbied for low-income housing. Wonderful. Real need for it in the area. Every penny that they won through the lobbying process went to a water main to the senator's hunting preserve. I mean, it's just stuff like this that, they're good lobbyists, but if you're a smaller lobbyist, you're getting overwhelmed and your solution's not being heard. So lobbying has to be cleaned up. I'd love the South Carolina model. We want to take that to other states. Just don't let the lobbyists give money.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Can we, the people, do anything to help drain the swamp?
Absolutely. I think what's happened, it's funny, 15 years ago, no one thought campaign finance reform was really a big issue. Now they all agree it's a big issue and no one thinks anything can be done about it. We somehow missed that whole middle constructive. But we really can. And as much as disastrous as this last year of election was in many ways, one thing it did is it did scare everyone. I mean, they now realize, wow, you kind of can go outside and people really are mad. And again, that's why, it's not a fluke that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump happened the same year. I mean, someone was going to catch that, and the officials are catching on to that. They're now realizing, well, people really are upset. So that's the big thing. Now, obviously, there are huge incumbent advantages and dark money that's pushing back in the other direction. But at very least, there are enough people out there that some people are going to have to lose their reelection, but they can see it's there. They can see at least there's the feeling there to knock them out of office.
Mm-hmm. Back there. Back behind you.
Do you get along with the people at the Mises Institute at Auburn?
That's good, knowledgeable. Auburn's a very small town. Mises, which is a big libertarian think tank, really sharp people, is it's within a mile of us. So You know, we're kind of in this little remote part of the world with a little football team that gets clobbered by Alabama every year. And we've got Mises Institute and others are right there. That's just a funny coincidence, but the Auburn student body, by the way, according to Princeton Review, is the most conservative public school student body in the country. So you have Mises there. But yeah, the Mises people are geniuses. When I was in campaigns, they always told me that when we got to real policy, my eyes would glass over because I'm a soundbite guy and a grassroots guy. But those people are geniuses over there, and we certainly hope to win them over on some of these, particularly picking winners and losers, you know, I think where they could see some benefit.
Go ahead.
It seems that most of your ideas line up with Represent Us, represent.us. And I was wondering if you do work with Represent Us and you know all the attorneys who formed Represent Us, and why are they two separate organizations?
Good question. Represent Us for everyone else is a phenomenal group. They've got a guy, Josh Silver, who runs them. And I think if you look at the groups that really want reform in money and politics, there are about 50 great progressive groups. And then there's Represent Us, which really is kind of an across-the-board, a good mix of everyone. And then I'd say kind of us and Peter Schweitzer's group, I mentioned before, wrote Clinton Cash, but also wrote Bush Bucks and Extortion. I mean, he's hit everyone, are definitely ones with more conservative background. I think and I talked to Represent Us. We just toured Missouri with them. I mean, they're one of our closest allies. We have found that conservatives who know we need campaign finance reform kind of need their own home because it's new. And that's where I think we've been valuable, where they need to look, is it okay to be a campaign finance reform person? I've always been a Republican, but this system now just seems terrible. So I think that's where we serve a little different distinction, even though they're a close ally, but they do a great job across the board. Gosh, they have 500,000 followers. I mean, they're just, they're an amazing organization.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the, is this working?
I think Ryan's got it,
It's
yeah.
working, okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned, was it 57 millionaires that choose our president, you said?
Yeah, billionaires, yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Adelson. No, see, he was a big supporter of Newt Gingrich, right?
Right.
Yeah, how did that work out?
Right.
Then there's Steyer, right, the guy who wanted to defeat all these Republicans who were skeptical of global warming. How successful was he?
Right.
Okay. Early on in the 2016, on the Republican side primary, who was the big fundraiser, the guy who was supposed to get all the money from the fat cats?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Bush. And, yeah.
Bush,
Yeah.
yes, and how did that work out?
Absolutely.
Right.
So you're right.
Expressing a little skepticism.
Oh, you're right. Those billionaires this year only went 451. I mean, they lost the presidency. This was the breakthrough. And this is why I do think there's hope. And, you know, some of my reform friends have trouble. I say, no, the Trump election should give you hope on this. And, of course, they're like, you know, this. But the point wasn't Trump. The point is someone did overcome the system. Now, let me tell you what happened in every other election. No incumbent member of Congress was losing. And let me tell you why. Candidates everywhere thought, oh, well, I'll have the Trump anti-establishment taking on the incumbent in this primary. And people would come to the polls. Again, a lot of people who work polls go door to door, and they'd say, great, you're for, you know, we're against Martha Roby in Alabama. She's establishment. We've got this opposing candidate, Tea Party champion, Becky Garrettson. And what would the person say? Look, I'm just here to vote for Trump. Okay, because I want to overturn the system. Okay, and great, and we have this member of Congress who would do the same thing. Well, you know, the only other person I've heard of is Martha Roby. So I'm going to vote for her. I'm here to get Trump in. So these billions that come in, they finally stubbed their toe on a presidential here. They didn't get to willow the field down to a few on the presidential. In Congress, I mean, there were no Dave Brats this year. I mean, there was no upset win. People came out and the money won on all those seats, and you know, like them or not. So yes, I think you're right. The counterexample is that Trump overcame, and Bernie almost did too. I mean, you had to, and that's the momentum. But that did not duplicate itself any way down the line.
Okay, except you're assuming that money creates winners. Another possibility is that winners attract money. Mm-hmm. That is to say, candidates who look plausible and are likely to win attract the contributions.
Right. Well, and I would say this goes straight to the question I got after starting this. I said, Well, you just disproved your own point. You just won with Dave Brat. And I said the same thing, but no one else won. I mean, I'd like to say I'm some genius. I'm not. We had a perfect candidate. It's like the jockey who rode Secretariat. Great jockey, I'm sure, but Secretariat was the best horse. So yeah, you're going to have, and we want more of these counterexamples, but right now they're just so few and far between. And yes, you can attract money. Some will wait and bet late. I mean, the reason Brat got $200,000 at the end is we did a commercial. Laura Ingraham loved it. She put it out. So yes, he started to look like a winner. I mean, that got us to 200,000. Cantor still had 5 million. So it is. Yeah, and my point is they've been picking the winners. I think this year is kind of the beginning of that being challenged where you can overcome it. But if they're allowed to hide their money. See, when Bloomberg went into Virginia to try to elect all the Democrats, it was all known. It was at least all disclosed. And at least everyone in Virginia said, well, I'm not quite with that New Yorker. I don't really want him winning. So at least if you have disclosure, that's one step where you at least have a choice. But when it's all dark money, it's coming from good sounding groups, it's going to win 99% of the time until we break this up.
We're going to wrap things up there. Before we go, a couple of thoughts. We have another event on Thursday. If you're interested, there's still a few seats remaining. Peggy Troy, who's the president and CEO of a children's hospital, children's health system. You're welcome to hear her talk about health care in today's world. Also, we're adding a couple of more events to on the issue schedule. One will be in late May, another one in early June, and you're welcome to sign up there. They are not on the website yet, but you can periodically check law.marquette.edu. Again, thanks so much for your attendance today, your interest in this topic, and most of all, thanks to our guest today, John Pudner. Take back our Republic.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate the time.